Yarn.
Yarn 28. Judy's callers.
I never knew an iota
Yeah,
about her.
my callers. Yeah.
That's very, over 30 years.
You
that's
have to
admirable.
learn. You have to learn.
My granny was a volunteer with the Samaritans for 30 years on their phone line, and I've always wanted to ask her about what it was like being on the end of those calls.
And how did you, were you nervous when you first went?
Oh, at
you
the
know what to
beginning,
expect?
the first when you take your first call, of course, it's. So when you go to that phone, you take a big deep breath and just wonder what's going to be the response or what's going to happen when you pick up that phone. Every single time you think about, now, what will this caller be about? My first call was about a person who had a gambling addiction, and that was not too difficult, and they weren't suicidal. See, Samaritans always ask their callers about how they feel about living or dying, and if suicide is in their minds at that time. And many people say, oh no, nothing as bad as that, or nothing like that. But then there are the other callers who you have now given permission for them to talk about how they might think of ending their lives. You listen for the background noises to think where they may be. They can be distressing because sometimes you pick up that the person is crying. Are they speaking on a street where there's a lot of background traffic noise and all? Are they at home and the television is blaring in the background? And so you use your brain to think about, to try and work out a little bit about what the circumstances of that caller may be. And you're very gentle and you have a lot of silence yourself, and that when you're beginning to be a volunteer is quite difficult to leave that silence. You know, you feel, oh, I must ask another question, what will I say, but leaving pauses is so important to learn. Just letting the silence lie between you. Gentle probing, and that's all it is. You don't always say too much, but you always ask about the suicide question, even if you're not going to get a reply.
You had said before that some of the calls were very serious, but then I know you said that some of the calls were just people taking the mick or whatever, or was there all sorts?
Yes, we do unfortunately get a lot of mischievous people. Sometimes you know their children and who are giggling in the background. And then unfortunately you also have very troubled people who think it's fun to talk sex and with the volunteer. When I started volunteering, first of all, we weren't ever allowed to put the phone down on a sexual call or on any call. You had to wait for the caller to end the call, and that was awful, and because it could go on for a long time.
Luckily now that has changed, and volunteers in those positions are able to end calls like that if they need to. But what hasn't changed is how important it still is to keep everything anonymous and confidential for callers and for the volunteers.
You're called by a number. In Dublin there's 250 volunteers, and so you had to have a number. So I was Judy 4, always do. I mean, if they still write to me occasionally, the Samaritans, about having little get-togethers and things, and I'm still Judy 4, which is rather nice. I'll be Judy 4 to the end of my days.
I think it's
The
great.
hardest thing as a new volunteer is when you go home not to talk to whoever your family, your husband, who you're used to hopefully talking about everything to suddenly not be able to share. The caller must know that they can trust you not to be spreading. Sometimes you feel you didn't handle that call very well, and you're worried about that, and you can talk that over with a leader, a senior Samaritan who's always available for you to talk with them. Most important, absolutely essential, that you don't bottle it up.
But there was one call that actually she was able to tell me about, and you'll see why. This call was special to her, and she wrote about it.
It was because I've written about it now, but it was one of the calls I'll always remember, you know. I think it was just because nighttime calls are tiring. Dawn was coming, we were getting tired, a lot of phone calls, one after the other, and here it was, this incredibly peaceful call. You have to tell me when I'm going to start.
Whatever you want, yeah.
Okay. Many years ago, when I was a Samaritan volunteer and coming to the end of a busy night shift, dawn was breaking over the rooftops of Dublin when I answered a phone call with the customary, "Samaritans, can I help you?" There was no response. So after some gentle probing about my caller's well-being, I too stayed silent while listening for any clues about this person who had contacted us. Then I realized that I could hear the sound of water gently lapping on the shore. And the clear sound of birdsong filling the silence between caller and listener. After a few more minutes, I thanked my caller for sharing these moments of tranquility with me, and hoped that whatever was going on in their lives at this time may have been slightly eased. The line went dead. I will never know anything about whoever my caller was, but I have never forgotten them, nor those special sounds of silence.
But where you said thank you to them on the call.
That's not really usual. I don't know whether, as a Samaritan, I should have said that, but I know I said it, rightly or wrongly. Because, just because of that this caller had decided purposefully, knew where they were, they knew they could hear the water and the bird song, and it was springtime and just dawn, so new light, and presumably it wasn't raining, and they'd let me share it. But then again, it was a human reaction. And it was only later on that I sort of processed what I'd gone through. It was very moving. I don't know. It's just one of those moments of my life that was strange. Maybe the poor caller thought, well, this woman isn't helping me very much. But hopefully something of that calm hit that person for a few minutes, as it did for me. As a person, having had a busy night. I've wondered to this day what the circumstances of that caller were and why they didn't say one word but let me hear the bird song and hear the water lapping. It just is a call that stayed with me.
This has been a story for yarnpodcast.com. Produced and narrated by me, Lucy Nuzum, and edited by John Roche.